to advise the members that the mics that we have improvised are live all the time, so be careful what you say when you think the mic is off. And I imagine that's true down there as well. First, I want to welcome our two witnesses, and they'll be introduced a little bit later. But once again, apologize to everybody for the inconvenience. I apologize to myself because nobody likes to be inconvenienced. But it looks like we have a system set up here that we can pursue with our hearings. And without objection, all members' opening statements will be made part of the record. The chair notes that some members may have additional questions for this panel, which they may wish to submit in writing. Without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 30 days for members to submit written questions to these witnesses and to place their responses in the record. Also, I would like to emphasize at this time that this hearing deals with a very complex matter, and it's a large amount of material, and therefore written questions, I'm sure, will be followed up. So I ask for as much cooperation as you can give us, because there are times when questions are sent in and they sort of get lost, but because there's so much and it's complicated, and now our time looks like it's going to be shortened, we may have to depend a whole lot on our written questions. So we ask for your cooperation there. But I will go ahead with an opening statement and offer time for anybody else who wants to have an opening statement. Pardon me? Yeah, I'll give mine first. Okay. Yeah, we haven't done that yet. But I want to emphasize that these hearings I consider very, very important. They've come about because of many things that's happened over the last few years. There's been a lot of movement in the country for more transparency in general, as well as with the Federal Reserve System, and I think my position on this is fairly well known. But also, there's been legislation passed. The Dodd-Frank bill has stipulations about more information coming to us by that legislation passed last year. There's also been the court cases that has required under the Freedom of Information Act, and we'll be dealing with a lot of that today. And also the provisions in the law that was language that was put in by basically Senator Sanders that has required some additional information. But, what is referred to today so often on hearings and the materials that came out of the Freedom of Information Act is called the dump. And I find that rather interesting to call it that, because it sounds like, a lot of material was dumped. And when you think of 29,000 pages of technical information, it is very, very large, and a lot of people have been studying it. Our staffs have been working very hard, and quite frankly, it isn't all that easy to figure out. It reminds me of a story that was told, and supposedly a true story, that an individual was being audited by the Federal Reserve. And they came to him and they said, "We want 5 years of everything that you've ever done, and every receipt you've ever had." And of course, that made him very unhappy. So he put them all together in a bushel basket, and he dumped them. And I'll tell you what, it didn't go over very well, and he got into a lot of trouble. I'm not suggesting this is similar, but it's a story that reminds me when I look and try to figure out really what we have. It's a lot of material, and to sort this out is not easy. The one argument, and I understand the argument very clearly on the hesitancy of the Federal Reserve not to give out too much information too early, with the idea that it might be proprietary, it might set the stage for concerns in the market. But, I think of this in contrast to what the purpose of the SEC is. This SEC has a purpose to investigate, demand reports, and get the information out immediately, and that's their responsibility. And if a company doesn't let us know exactly what they're doing and what their accounting procedures are, they get into a lot of difficulty. But the argument seems to be different for the Federal Reserve, that if we have information about a bank that might be, in difficulty, in a market situation, that information should be available to us. So I take the position that information shouldn't be that detrimental to us, and that the more we can get, the better. And I am hopeful that today we will be able to ask some pertinent questions to get more information, that members can follow up with more questions later on, and that there will be more transparency without ever injuring anybody. That certainly would be my goal. First, we have Mr. Scott Alvarez as General Counsel at the Board of Governors, a post he has held since 2004. He has been with the board for 30 years. And also, Mr. Thomas Baxter, Jr. has been General Counsel and Executive Vice President of the legal group at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York since 1995. He also serves as Deputy General Counsel of the FOMC. Mr. Baxter has been with the New York Fed for more than 30 years. Without objection, your written statements will be made a part of the record. It has been agreed upon by the witnesses, Ranking Member Clay and myself, that Mr. Alvarez will deliver the oral remarks for the joint written testimony of Mr. Alvarez and Mr. Baxter. This testimony may run longer than the customary 5 minutes. And I yield now to Mr. Alvarez.
Chairman Paul, Ranking Member Clay, members of the subcommittee, Thomas Baxter, the General Counsel of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York, and I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the ways the Federal Reserve informs the Congress and the American people about its policies and actions. Central bank lending facilitates the implementation of monetary policy and allows the central bank to address short-term liquidity pressures in the banking system. This role of lender of last resort is a critical one, long filled by central banks around the world, especially during times of economic crisis, when discount window lending can mitigate strains in financial markets that could otherwise escalate and lead to sharp declines in output and employment. In the United States, all discount window loans are fully secured, and the Federal Reserve has not suffered a loss to date on its discount window lending. The Federal Reserve regularly releases significant, detailed information about its operations in order to promote the understanding of how the Federal Reserve fosters financial stability and economic stability, and to facilitate an evaluation of our actions while preserving the ability to effectively fulfill the responsibilities that Congress has given the Federal Reserve. Since 1914, the Federal Reserve has published its balance sheet every week. We also publish full financial statements annually that are audited by an independent public accounting firm, which for the last 4 years has been Deloitte & Touche. These audits cover Maiden Lane 2, and Maiden Lane 3, as well as the transactions conducted through the discount window and with foreign central banks. The Federal Reserve also publishes a special monthly report to Congress, posted on our website, that details the Federal Reserve's emergency lending programs, including providing information on the amount of lending under each program, the type and level of collateral associated with those loans, and information about the borrowers under those facilities. In addition, the Federal Reserve Bank of New York maintains a website that includes schedules of purchases and sales of securities as part of open market operations, with CUSIP information describing the securities involved. The Federal Reserve is fully cooperating with the GAO in an extensive review of each of the special lending facilities developed during the crisis. This review will assess operational integrity, internal controls, security and collateral policies, policies governing third-party contractors, and the existence of any conflicts of interest or inappropriate favoritism in the establishment or operation of the facilities. As provided by the Dodd-Frank Act, on December 1st, 2010, the board published detailed information on its website about the Federal Reserve's actions during the financial crisis. This release includes the names of borrowers, the amount borrowed, the date credit was extended, the interest rate charged, information about collateral, and a description of the credit terms under each facility. Similar information was provided for the draws of foreign central banks on their dollar liquidity swap lines with the Federal Reserve. For agency MBS transactions, details included the name of the counterparty, the security purchased or sold, and the date, amount, and price of the transaction. On March 31st, 2011, the Federal Reserve released documents related to the discount window in response to requests filed under the Freedom of Information Act. The March 31st release included documents containing information related to borrowers at the discount window between August 8th, 2007 and March 1st, 2010 that was not required to be disclosed under the Dodd-Frank Act. Going forward, the Dodd-Frank Act provides for the release of information on any broad-based emergency lending facility 1 year after the termination of the facility, as well as a GAO audit of the facility. The Act also provides for the release of information regarding discount window lending and open market operations conducted after July 21, 2010, with a 2-year lag. For lending facilities, including both emergency lending facilities and the discount window, and for open market operations, the Federal Reserve will publish information disclosing the identity of the borrower or counterparty, transaction amount, interest rate or discount paid, and the collateral pledged. The Federal Reserve believes the lags provided by the Dodd-Frank Act for the release of transaction-level information establish an important balance between the public's interest in information about participants in transactions with the Federal Reserve and the need to ensure that the system can effectively use its congressionally authorized power to maintain the stability of the financial system and implement monetary policy. We will carefully monitor developments in the use of the discount window and other Federal Reserve facilities and keep the Congress informed about their effectiveness. The Federal Reserve has worked and will continue to work with the Congress to ensure that our operations promote the highest standards of accountability, stewardship, and policy effectiveness consistent with meeting our statutory responsibilities. We appreciate the opportunity to describe the Federal Reserve's efforts on this important subject and are happy to answer any questions you may have, and we will be responsive to any written questions you may submit as well. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
I thank the gentleman. I will yield myself 5 minutes, but announce that we will likely be able to have repeat questioning. I think the time will permit that, but I will start off with the 5 minutes. I first want to ask unanimous consent to admit an article for the record from Bloomberg called Fed Gave Banks Crisis Gains on $80 billion Secretive Loans without objection. I want to refer to one document, and this little document from the material that we got from the Federal Reserve. It's called a Chart Pack of Market Monitoring Metrics for Fed Facilities. And I'm sure you know all 29,000 pages, and you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. But it tells you about the problem that we have in trying to find out information. And this particular document has 327 pages to it. But in this particular document, it had some interesting material that I did not know about, and I want to ask about it. And it reveals that there was a previously undisclosed federal Fed lending program known as the Single Tranche Open Market Operations, and it's referred to as STOMO. And this is something new, and it allows to give 0.01%, that is free money, to companies like Goldman Sachs, and was essentially a free loan to these well-connected businesses. But also the problem that we had in analyzing this to find out information that we're looking for is it turns out that just in this particular area, 81% of the contents has been redacted. So we end up with a lot of pages, and then we end up with 19% actually has information that we have to sort out. The question is why were these details, not mentioned? Is it that everything has to be done in secret? We'd like to know, the people would like to know, but we didn't see any evidence until this was dug out of here, and maybe it was mistakenly not redacted or something like that. It makes us wonder why we don't know about this. And that, of course, is one of my big beefs with the Federal Reserve, is that the central bank wields so much power, so much financial power. You literally can have transactions greater than what we can do with our own budget. And that's why it's a deep concern to me, but to many other people as well. But why was this not published? And are these and other programs that have yet to be disclosed, are there others? Why were so many pages redacted? Can you really claim this to be in compliance with FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, when we don't know what's been excluded? And I would like to get your reaction from this and talk specifically about this one program and what's been going on with it.
So, Mr. Chairman, the program you refer to, the Single Tranche OMO program, was not a secret program. It was actually publicly announced by the Federal Reserve on March 7th, 2008, when the program began. It was a short-term program that ended in January of 2009, and transactions that were conducted under that program as part of our open market operations were reported along with other open market operations on the New York Federal Reserve Bank website very quickly after the transactions occurred. The documents you have before you are from the response for the Freedom of Information Act request. And so that itself should explain why there are redactions. The way the Freedom of Information Act works, it is a request for certain types of information in documents. So redactions are made. First, the agency collects all documents that may have any information that relates to the request. Then information that is not requested is taken out of the documents, redacted from the documents, simply because it's not responsive to the request. So it's not a desire to keep things secret. It's instead a desire to be responsive to the requests. There often, when a requester asks for documents, there often is information that is extraneous or not the kind of information that was requested, not relevant to the request, and that's taken out of the documentation. And that's why you see so much redaction in the documents before you. These documents were reviewed by the court and released by the court in accordance with the Freedom of Information Act.
Does that mean if somebody would follow up and broaden that request, that all that material could become available? Would they have to just change the Freedom of Information Act request?
So if another request were made for a broader range of information, we would review that information, determine what is confidential and what could be released, and a decision then would be made on that request.
Can it be made so broad that just turn over everything?
I'm not sure there are enough people in the world to look at everything we have to turn over everything, but we would do the best we could.
Okay. My 5 minutes is up, and I now yield to Mr. Clay. I would like to direct this question to Mr. Baxter, and I want to follow up on Mr. Jones's question about how some of these decisions are made and how sometimes the big guys seem to benefit and the little people lose their mortgages and lose their homes and they lose their jobs. And quite frankly, it's very difficult times in this country because it seems like people are too little to save. There's people too big to forget about them, too big to let them fail. But I want to direct the question about the foreign loans. And it seems to me from the figures I look at that nearly 1/3 of all the loans during this period of time went to foreign banks. And at one time, at the peak of this, 88% of these overall discount window loans went to foreign banks. And then, but at the New York Fed, I think practically, essentially 100% of the loans were going to foreign banks. And the answer I get is that they're foreign banks, but they have subsidiaries and they qualify under the rules. I wouldn't say the law, but under the rules that they can go to the discount window. But it just seems to be way out of proportion when you think of that tremendous amount of loaning that went to these foreign banks. And this is not easy for the average American citizen to understand. Could you enlighten us on why it seems to be disproportionate? I'm sure they don't represent that percentage of the financial problems that existed. They weren't, a third of the problems didn't deal with foreign banks, surely. What is the explanation for that?
Yes, Chairman Paul, thank you for that question. First, the starting point is federal statutory law. In Section 13, Paragraph 14 of the Federal Reserve Act says to the Federal Reserve that with respect to discount window borrowing, we are to treat the branch or the agency of a foreign bank just like we treat our own U.S. chartered depository institutions. So there's this principle of national treatment that we start with, and it's a principle that is embedded in the Federal Reserve Act itself. And so we must treat the branch and agency of a foreign bank in the same manner we treat our own. So that's the starting point. Second is New York is the money center of the United States. And with respect to foreign banks that intend to come to our country and invest in our people and form branches and agencies in the United States, many of those foreign banking organizations look to form those organizations in the money center, which is in New York. So the short answer to your question, Chairman Paul, is the law requires us to lend to branches and agencies, and with respect to New York in particular, that tends to be the place where foreign banking organizations enter our country.
Okay, proportionately it still seems to be out of whack. But when the system invite foreign banks, they're making most of their money overseas, well, just open up a subsidiary in New York, and therefore they get the line of credit and the protection of the bank, and it's sort of almost like free insurance for them. And do you think this is a good idea that a foreign bank, all they have to do is open up and get these bailouts? I mean, it just doesn't seem fair at all.
Well, these were loans, Chairman Paul. They weren't gifts in any way, and the foreign banks have to repay just like everyone else, principal and interest. Second, if a foreign bank, and some do, decide that they would prefer not to form a branch or an agency, but to start a subsidiary bank in the United States, that is their option, and some foreign banks do just that. And of course, the subsidiary bank, which would have a U.S. charter, that has access to the discount window as well.
So I'd add one more thing. There is a limit on the amount that they can borrow. They're limited by the amount of collateral that they have that they can post at the discount window. So that's dollar collateral in the United States. That doesn't allow the foreign central bank the foreign bank to borrow to the full extent of its assets worldwide. It borrows in order to support its dollar activities. And those dollar activities are largely, though not exclusively, you have a point there, but largely in the United States.
Could the argument be made that maybe the banks in Greece should have had a lot more subsidiaries in New York, and maybe then Greece wouldn't be in so much trouble? The Fed would have bailed them out too.
No, they're still, their assets are in Greece, and they're Greek assets, and they would go to the Greek central bank to borrow there, not to the United States.
I thank the gentleman. I have a few short questions, and then we'll finish up. The one thing is, on a follow-up on what Mr. Jones says, is the confidence is very low. But when you speak of independence, and I understand your terms, and I disagree with the need for that, but I understand it. But what people hear when you say independence, they hear secrecy. You're going to keep it from us. And like the point I made at the beginning, the SEC is to pressure companies to reveal information, where the Federal Reserve does the opposite. They want, no, we can't tell anything because it might disturb the markets. But I do have one question. During the crisis, or any time that you're aware of, has the Federal Reserve or Treasury participated in any gold swaps arrangements?
We don't. The Federal Reserve does not own any gold at all. We have not owned gold since 1934. So we have not engaged in any gold swaps.
But it appears on your balance sheet that you hold gold.
What appears on our balance sheet is gold certificates. When we turned before 1934, the Federal Reserve did own gold. We turned that over by law to the Treasury and received in return for that gold certificates.
If the Treasury entered into, because under the Exchange Stabilization Fund, I would assume they probably have the legal authority to do it. They wouldn't be able to do it then because you have the securities for essentially all the gold?
No, we have no interest in the gold that is owned by the Treasury. We have simply an accounting document that is called gold certificates that represents the value at a statutory rate
and still,
of gold that we gave to the Treasury in 1934.
And still measured at $42 an ounce, which makes no sense whatsoever. But, you know, the conventional wisdom today says that gold is really not money. We don't want it to be money. I mean, if you're for the gold standard, there's something wrong with you. And yet we hold the gold. And, you know, there have been suggestions made, and I've sort of, encouraged the suggestion, you know, if gold is not money and it's an asset and you don't even use it because it's on your balance sheets and you don't even use it at the real value, would you have a position on this? Why shouldn't the Treasury just sell the gold, give it back to the people? The people had it at one time. Let the people have it. Would you have any objection to that? Would you advise us and say, no, that's not good. We ought to hold the gold? Do you think holding the gold is a good idea or a bad idea?
So I have no position on that at all. That's clearly
no
a matter
position.
for the Treasury. It's a matter for the Treasury. It's not within the purview of the Federal Reserve.
Mr. Baxter, would you have an opinion?
My opinion is I agree with Mr. Alvarez.
No position. Well, it's amazing because I've asked questions to the Federal Reserve, the members of the board for years, and whether it's been Mr. Greenspan, I can't recall exactly whether I've asked Mr. Bernanke, but it's always, well, no, we have to hold on to these assets. But if it's not money and we don't need it, we're not going on a gold standard, I mean, I would think that they shouldn't be holding it. The reason I ask that is the truth is gold is money and people don't throw it away and people do cling to it. But I would be really, there's a lot of people who suspect because of this lack of transparency that there's been a tremendous amount of gold swaps and loans made, and central banks sold a lot of gold after these the last 10 years. A lot of the gold has left the West and has gone to the East, and the central banks that now have positive trade balances, they buy up the gold. There has to be a message in there and a significance, even for those who don't want the restraints of gold. It has to be a message out there that we should look at, because we're in a financial mess, and it has to do with our monetary system, and it's being reflected today in rising prices and a weak economy. And just printing all this money isn't doing any good. All this stuff that's been done for 3 years, and you look at the economic statistics now, they're horrible. And these people who lost their jobs, they're still unemployed. The people who bought stocks in the year 2000, if they held on, they probably haven't even broken even. They probably lost purchasing power. So eventually, I know this is off the subject a little bit, but it is reflected only in that we don't know exactly what goes on, and people, when they don't know, then they get suspicious and they say, well, it's kept secret from us. Why aren't we allowed to know? And we just march on. And the type of dollars we're talking about, and when we hear about this money going to central banks and banks that Gaddafi was a part owner in, I mean, this stuff is this really stirs up the emotions of a lot of people. But I do appreciate you being here, and I know that there'll be a lot of questions. There will be written questions submitted, and we'd appreciate your cooperation and send us our answers back. And I thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman.
This hearing is adjourned.